Hey everybody, welcome to our first webinar of 2025. I'm just going to pause for a second while people start getting logged in. I'm seeing those numbers start to go up from our waiting room, so that is excellent. So we'll just give it a minute. Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome to our first webinar of 2025. For those of you who have joined us for previous webinars, as always, welcome back. If you are new, welcome. We're so glad that you can join us. This is a new webinar topic with a new instructor, so this will be a fun one today. I'm just going to go over a few notes, and then I'll introduce our new instructor, and then we will get started. For those of you who are new, this is a Zoom webinar, so we can't see or hear you during this class. To ask questions, you will click on your Q&A box, type those questions in. I'll be monitoring those, and I'll give them to Savannah. We're going to hold most questions for the end of the class, like the last 20 minutes or so, but we'll take any questions that are super timely during. So if you need any clarification or anything, please feel free to send those in. We are recording today, so if you need to leave early for any reason, or if you want to access this after the class, you can go to YouTube. We'll be uploading this class about 24 hours following the conclusion of it. I think that's it on my end. So this is Savannah, our new instructor. Savannah is the new buyer of our greenhouse plants at the Fair Oaks store. So I'm very excited to have her. We were chatting a few weeks ago about the new plants that she was bringing in, and I asked her if she'd join us to do a class to showcase some of them, tell you all about them, and give you an idea of what new and exciting things we have in the store. So if you guys ever need any plants or you have requests, Savannah is the person to ask. So you can call the Fair Oaks store and talk to her, and she'll give you a good idea today of some of the things we have right now. Savannah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll mute my microphone and let you get started.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Like she said, my name is Savannah. I work in the greenhouse at the Fair Oaks location, and I think it's 9 plants to show you all today. It was actually kind of hard to pick them because we have a lot of really interesting stuff in the greenhouse right now. We're trying to get a lot of new things in this year. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is this one. It's Mandarin spider plant. And I believe Sally has a list of all the spellings of the plants that she can put in the chat if you need it, because some of them are a little bit crazy. Mandarin spider plant, though, is like the other spider plants that you're probably familiar with. It grows the same way, but it's a little bit more rare. I actually haven't seen this one in 2 years, so it's really cool that we got to get it this year. If you can see, the name of it comes from the bright orange stems there, and they have a much wider, more like lush look than the regular spider plant does, which is super cool. They are in the same family. I know there's a lot of plants out there that their common names are the same, but their species names are different. But this one is in the chlorophytum family, like the regular spider plant that you're probably familiar with, which means that according to the ASPCA, it's actually safe for cats and dogs to be around, which is super cool because I know that a lot of people struggle with finding especially cat safe. Cats can get up on shelves and such. So if you're someone who's looking for like something interesting and new, and you have a cat or dog, this is something to look for. They're just as easy as the regular spider plants are. They're kind of like a good corner plant. They want a medium to bright indirect light. They'll probably get a little leggy in lower lights, although they can tolerate it. It's one of those things where it's best to be in medium light. But if they're getting a little bit lower than that, it's not going to kill them. But I would recommend medium to bright light, especially if you want it to retain those really nice colors on the stems. I would consider them easy as well in terms of watering. They're not super demanding. They are a moisture-loving plant. But if you're familiar with like peace lilies and the way the peace lilies will start drooping as soon as they're dry, this is not one of those plants. So right now it's about halfway dry on the soil. So I would water this one today. I don't know if you saw that, but I usually stick my finger up to the second knuckle to check on things if they're dry. So I'll probably water this one today, and that's typically what I would recommend for them. About the first fourth to a third of the soil. Once that's dry, you can water it again. Other than that, they're super easy. And I would recommend this to anyone who is really interested in getting a little bit, take another step into more new looking plants, but isn't quite confident in their ability to take on more advanced species. Um,
Yeah, we did have a question, and just since we're going over all the light requirements for these plants, I'm
yeah,
wondering if you could take a couple minutes to explain the bright indirect light, the difference between
yeah,
like bright,
okay. So
indirect, direct, and low.
So, um, it's, I wish I had a piece of paper to kind of draw it, but basically indirect light is when you have if I was to say bright indirect light, that's if you have a window that either has direct light shining through it, which means that you can see the physical, like you can see the rays coming in. That would be a plant that is maybe off to the side of that window, so it's not directly in those rays, but it can benefit from that bright ambient light. Another option is if you have a window that is getting bright light, but is maybe shaded by some trees outside. Basically, when you say bright indirect light, you're talking about being near a window that's got really good sun coming in, but not directly in those rays. And it's just because a lot of plants, actually a lot of the ones that we're going to talk about today are aroids, which means that among other things, but one of the hallmarks of that family is that they are understory plants, so they're not used to being in direct light in their natural environment. So you're going to get burning, you're going to get shriveling. So it's best for most of the things, and I'll point out the ones that want different light requirements, but most of these things would be suitable for a bright indirect light area in your house, which is what most people have anyway. A lot of people don't have direct sun.
Okay,
Um,
perfect. Thank you so much.
I guess now that we're talking about light, I can bring out one that, so this guy is one that I'm really excited about. Again, same thing with the mandarin spider plant. I haven't seen him in a couple of years. This is Agave geminiflora. Super cool. Unlike other agave you may have seen that are kind of aloe shaped that have kind of thick, really spiky leaves, these guys are very bouncy, which is really cool. They're like little puff balls. Um, and they do want direct light. So agave are going to be a plant that wants to have at minimum bright indirect light, but they're going to really, really benefit from having some direct sun. So if you had maybe a window that got bright indirect light for most of the day and maybe a couple of hours of direct sun, that would be really good for them. Another cool thing about agave is how hardy they are in terms of moisture. They can go a pretty decent amount of time without water. Obviously, every plant's going to need water eventually, but they're very drought tolerant, which means that this is one that I would actually classify as being good for someone who needs something that can just be left, right? So when you think of plants that are good for someone who has like an office, you think probably of like snake plants, ZZ plants, Dracaena, all of those low light, low water plants. But a lot of those plants would not do well in a bright light environment. So you think, okay, what's a good plant for if I want something low maintenance, but if I have a really sunny window? Agave is one of those plants, which is super cool. Especially because agave has a very, very distinct like look to it. You can't really get anywhere else, especially this guy. Um, they are still spiky on the end like agave is, so I would be careful of that. But they're a little bit more forgiving because they're not so sharp. I have had several times where other agave have left splinters in me, and it's not fun. This guy's never hurt me like that, so good for that. Um, for watering, I tend to go by pot weight for them. So you want it to be super light. Another thing about them is that they like to be in kind of smaller pots, for the same reason that they like to dry out. If you put an agave in a really big pot, you have a bunch of extra space around there that has soil that's going to hold on to moisture, and it's going to kind of suffocate your roots. Well, it is going to suffocate your roots, not kind of. Um, so you want to keep them in kind of smaller pots. And that way you can really tell when it's dried out. So this guy is a little bit light, and I'm actually going to wait a couple of days on him anyway. And they do really well in like a well-draining soil. So what you can do with that is you can either take a regular potting mix, just an all-purpose potting mix, add in some perlite, add in some sands. I mean, we also sell a succulent and cactus mix, but if you're like me and you have just like bags of soil laying around, it's easy to amend it as well. And they would prefer that because, like I said, agave, most cacti and succulents as well, really want to drain. Um, Another thing about them is that you would want to put them in. So they would prefer to be in either a plastic pot or a terracotta pot. And the reason for that is just, I mean, the same thing we've been talking about. They really like to dry out. Sometimes when you get into glazed ceramic containers, it can trap moisture in there, which is okay for some plants, not dry loving plants. If you have a pot that you really like that you think looks good with your plant, a really good way to get around that and not risk moisture damage to your roots is just to leave your plant in the plastic pot and just put it in there instead. It's really easy way. Most plants you cannot even tell that they're in plastic inside of ceramic, which is why I do it with all of my plants at home. But these guys would really benefit from that. They want well-draining soil, a pot that drains really well, and they want to be allowed to really dry out in between waterings. Other than that, they're super easy, and I would recommend it for anyone who had like a bright spot and wanted an easy plant. Okay, so on the other end of the spectrum, this is Homolamina camouflage. And you can kind of, I'll tilt it down so you can really see her leaves. This is a really, really, really cool plant. They grow similarly to their structure, I mean, to like Chinese evergreens and peace lilies, where they're going to be continuously pushing out leaves, but every now and then they'll push out a new pup off the bottom. And they're going to be more of like a short, bushy, round shape as opposed to something taller. But unlike peace lilies and most Chinese evergreens, they have just a really cool, almost random patterning to their leaves, which is really awesome. I think that they're beautiful. They've got just like a really vibrant green color to them. Um, I see the thing about pups. It's more of an offshoot. Um, but on the other side of things, so the agave, we talked about how they really can tolerate the pups is a cute name for it. It's not the technical name, but it would be more of an offshoot. Um, Agave like to dry out. These guys really won't tolerate that. If you are familiar with peace lilies at all, you'll know that if they get too dry, they will start to wilt really bad. They're forgiving, which is really nice. But same thing will happen with these guys, where they like to have moisture as soon as the top, like maybe like inch or of soil has dried out. Um, they are not going to be very tolerant at all of infrequent watering schedules. Um, which is good for a lot of people who have like a heavy-handed watering. I know a lot of people, you get a spectrum of people some people who forget to water, some people who do over a little bit too excited about watering. These guys would be more tolerant of that than like an agave or a snake plant would. Um, they are going to prefer like a bright indirect light, just like the spider plant would. Their leaves are a little bit tender. So I would say the spider plant, you can get away with like a little bit of direct light, maybe in the morning. These guys are really not going to appreciate that. So kind of like with the peace lily, where they're just going to start burning right away. But that's okay. They would prefer to have a bright indirect light, medium to bright, and they're going to be good with that. Um,
Savannah, we got a question. People are wondering how large these plants will grow. Like, if
okay.
are there any that are going to get huge, or will they stay about the same size?
I'm looking at what I have just so I can give a good. So I can actually just pull these back really quick. Spider plant is a bush. It's never going to get tall. If you see a lot of times they're kept in hanging baskets. So they're always going to stay about this height and more bush out. Your agave is basically going to stay this size. I mean, they'll get continuously larger, but they're kind of slow growers. And again, they're not tall growing plants. Um, Homolamina, because like I said, they flush out at the bottom. Homolamina, I think it might be in the chat. If not, can we put that in there?
Yeah, I haven't put it in yet. I'm sorry, guys. I got behind. I'm doing that now.
Homolamina, like it flushes out at the bottom. So it is going to continue to push out new growth from, actually you can kind of see right here. it's pushing out a new leaf right here from a stalk that's already existing. So it is going to continue to do that, but again, it's going to be more of a bush-shaped plant. So it will get bigger. If you've ever seen a really large Chinese evergreen, it's going to be shaped like that.
Okay.
Where it's going to be really wide but low.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Uh, okay. Oh, and I did forget to mention that they all do I know we had a note to make sure that we talked about flowers. And I do have a couple that actually do flower, but everything I've talked about so far has been plants that are more grown for their foliage. Same thing with this one. They do all have flowers, but they're really kind of prized for their really unique foliage. Speaking of which, this is Anthurium clarinervium. Very, very cool plant. I actually just bought one of these for myself because I could not help it. They are very cool. They are in the Anthurium family. They're not going to produce that flower that typical anthuriums, when you think of anthurium, they're also called the flamingo lily. They've got like a bright red or pink flower. These guys do produce a similarly shaped flower, but it's a lot skinnier. And again, you're really, really buying one of these for the like jewel looking leaves. They've got a deep green. It kind of, you can't really see it, but it's more of a purplish undertone on the leaf. And they're like, I don't even know how to describe the texture really. It's almost like leathery. If you've ever felt a black velvet alocasia, it's very similar in texture, which is super cool. They're like matte as well. They're not super shiny. They're going to be grown just as easily as any other anthurium would. Bright indirect light, again, it's an aeroid, so no direct sun. They do have epiphyte roots, which means that they like a lot of airflow around their roots. So a good way to mix your soil for these guys is to have your regular all-purpose potting mix. Get yourself some like orchid bark, perlites, stuff like that that's good for aerating soil and breaking up texture. Mix that all together, and that's going to give you a really, really happy anthurium, and also aeroids in general, things like philodendron, pothos, Chinese evergreens like it as well, are going to like just something a little bit more texture in their soil. Sometimes when you have a really dense soil, again, it can trap your roots. It can cause them to not, they need air. So if you have a really dense soil, it can trap moisture and it can suffocate your roots actually. So these guys would love to have a really chunky mix. And it's very easy to do. Same thing with the agave. If you have like a regular potting mix, get yourself some orchid bark, some perlite, mix it all together, and they're good to go. These guys, they do like a little bit more humidity. So in like a bathroom or a kitchen, and it's really good that they don't like direct light because I know a lot of people don't have that in their bathroom or kitchen. But they would be really good for that. Also, another way to increase humidity in a space is to group plants together. I know some people do have humidifiers. I don't. I actually just take like 3 or 4 plants, put them together, because when the plant respirates, which means that it's releasing moisture out of its leaf, it'll humidify the plant as well. So if you have a bunch of them together, they'll kind of create their own little humid environment, which is kind of cool. I would not recommend spraying this plant. I know some places do recommend spraying certain plants for humidity, but just because of the interesting texture on their leaves, I would not, just because you're going to see water spots if you spray it on there. But that's the Anthurium clarinervium. Very cool plants. I'm very excited to see these. I had never seen them in person before we got them, so I was very happy that we were able to get them. Um, okay, so this is Apple Bolus. And the second part of its name, I actually cannot pronounce. It starts with an L. If we could get that in the chat, that would be great. Lavellii, I think is maybe how it's pronounced. This plant used to be in a different family that is also hard to pronounce called Schismatoglottis. I don't know why they reclassified it, but they did. So it's its own species now. It's got these really like deep purplish red stems to it, which are super cool. You don't see that a whole lot in plants that grow this way. There's a couple Chinese evergreens that will have like stark white stems. Um, but this is super cool. They've got this like very similar to the homolamina camouflage where they've got like a, I can maybe, I don't want to spill all the soil all over the place, but
I was
they've
going to
got
ask you
like,
to show the leaf.
yeah, I was trying to figure out how to do it without spilling soil everywhere, but they've
Perfect.
got like a, almost like marble it, I guess I would say, marble pattern to them. But it's a really distinct silvery look, which you don't, again, you don't get a whole lot of in plants. So this combination of purple and also the bottoms of the leaves are the same purple as the stem. So that combination of like purplish red stem and like silverly marbled leaves is super cool. Yeah, I can't think of any other plant that has that. So it's really nice to see. It kind of breaks up a lot of the bright greens that you can see in a greenhouse. Um, this is our first time having this, as far as I'm aware, just because of the reclassification. I believe it was in the last couple of years. I'm not certain on that, but I believe it was. Um, but they are, as far as I know, they're not super hard, which is very cool for such an interesting looking plant. Um, in the same, they're also aeroids, so same kind of general rules that you as you would get for other aeroids. So no direct sun, medium to bright indirect light. They like a chunkier mix, so get yourself some bark, some perlite, mix it in there, or a houseplant aeroid soil. They do like a lot of moisture, but same thing with like you're gonna have this with the anthurium as well, where if you keep these soils constantly moist, you're gonna end up having a problem with overwatering. So what I would recommend is for most of the stuff that I have here today and everything I've shown so far, aside from the agave, is you want to check your soil up to a fourth to a third of your soil and make sure that that has dried down before you water again. And what that does is it just allows for oxygen to get in around the soil, around the roots. That's really, really important for most plants. There's some out there that don't need a whole lot of it, but most tropical plants, especially ones that you'll find in a greenhouse, it's really, really important that you let them dry down at least a little bit before you water them again. So I usually in the greenhouse will either pick them up because they're in plastic pots, so you can see, like you can feel how light they are. If you have it in a heavier pot like terracotta or glazed ceramic, I do really, really, really recommend that you just take the time to stick your finger into the soil up to the second knuckle. If it's dry, water it again. If it's not, leave it alone. Um, and that can really get you a step ahead in preventing overwatering. Because and it's a really big issue for a lot of the aeroids. I'm going to continue to say that because it's really, really important for aeroids to get air around their roots because they have aerial roots that like that kind of thing. But back on the apibolus, um, they would appreciate a little bit of humidity the same way that the anthurium would. So again, group a couple plants together. Just because of the unique leaf texture, I would not recommend spraying directly onto the leaf, especially because in greenhouses, it's good to spray the plants because it's so warm that you're going to be having it humidify the plant right away. In your house, well, maybe you keep your house at 80 degrees. I don't know. You might. I don't. So you're not going to have moisture that sits there on the leaf for a long time, and that can create water spots. It can also be a great place for bacteria to grow, which is why I don't recommend spraying leaves directly for most plants. A really good way to raise humidity is to group plants together or get yourself like a pebble tray, which is just like a shallow tray that you put pebbles in and you so that the plant can sit out of the moisture and then fill it with like half an inch of water so that it's not actually soaking into the plant, but then as it warms up, it'll humidify the plant above it. Anyway, Apobolus, very cool. New-ish, I guess not super new if you consider that it existed before, but new family, super cool. Really fun to have this in the
Can
green.
you say does that plant get very tall or much
Oh,
larger?
yes, yes, sorry.
Looks like one that might get pretty tall.
It's gonna grow similarly to a peace lily. So again,
Okay,
it's gonna get more bush shaped, but
got it.
because their leaves are so long and they grow upwards, it is gonna get a little bit of height to it. But same, you can kind of see here
See.
so this was probably right here. This was the main stem at some point. And then
Okay.
kind of see where it had offshoots. And that's what I was kind of trying to say with the homolamina, where they are mostly going to be producing like their growth at the base.
Got it.
So
Okay.
pre-existing stems will produce new leaves and it will progressively get taller from that reason. But it's going to be more of like a short, wide plant. What time is it? 12:25. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna gather these. They're for the same plant. I just couldn't pick a color. This is um you might recognize this plant. It's kalanchoe, which is how it's pronounced. I know a lot of people say kalanchoe, but it's actually pronounced kalanchoe. Not that I would turn you away for saying kalanchoe, but kalanchoe. It is the flowering kalanchoe. There are a lot of kalanchoe. It's a succulent, so there's a lot of kalanchoe that exist out there that are not going to give you bright flowers like this. But this is specifically kalanchoe bicolor, and it is. I don't know if you can see it that far away, but they have a very, very pretty flower stem. So these are all pink, and they're all gonna have a color in the center, and then this one's got like white on the edge. This one's got more white on the edge. This one's like a reddish color with pink on the outside, and that's where the bicolor comes from. So typically when you see flowering kalanchoe, they're gonna be like just plain red, just plain yellow, just plain orange. We have those in the greenhouse all the time. Kalanchoe bicolor is a little bit more rare, which is super cool. They're going to be grown the same way you would any other kalanchoe if you're familiar with them. They're a succulent type plant, which means that when they're out of flower, you do want to make sure that you're drawing back on your watering just a little bit. But when they're in bloom, you do want to water them enough to make sure that the top third of soil never dries out completely. The cool thing about kalanchoe is also that they can actually flower all times of year. So they won't bloom continuously throughout the year. Any blooming plant does need some amount of rest in between, but they can bloom any time of year. So say these guys stopped blooming like in a week. They won't, but say they did. I would take it, just the plant itself. You can actually take it to like a cabinet or a closet, or if you just had a really dark room, give it about 12 to 14 hours of really, really dark, not dark light, I guess that's, you want to keep them in a dark space for about 12 to 14 hours a day. Give them like a medium indirect light for the rest of the day, for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then put them back in their bright light, which is what they prefer when they're in flower, and that can actually stimulate them to flower. So what's really cool about them is that they don't need a whole lot of downtime like some flowering plants do. Some flowering plants need like half a year. These guys don't. It's like a couple of months. So that's super cool. You're not going to get that continuous blooming if you leave it in bright light, because they are, I mean, if you think about it, in their natural environment, you'd have winter and then spring, right? So you have to kind of simulate that transition, where you have to keep them a little bit colder, give them a little bit less light, give them a little less water for maybe like a couple of months, and then go back to your normal schedule. And you should see some new buds, which is very fun. Another thing that can help is a bloom boosting fertilizer, which we do carry here. I know a lot of brands of fertilizer have a specific blossom booster. So yeah, kalanchoe bicolor. They are not going to get very big at all. They are, let me see if one has a good example of it. They're like, so they're a branching plant. So these all have one singular stem in the pot. But you can see right there, they're going to branch out from certain points on the stem. So if you want to just let it grow, you can. But if you like the cute little size of them, it's very easy to, once they're done flowering, because the flowers grow out of the ends of these stems. So if you see this knuckle here that produces this stem, it actually ends in the flower. So you don't want to be trimming any of the stems while it's in flower, because then you're going to be cutting off your flowers. But after it's done flowering, if you just take like a pair of scissors, cut it down to the node there, it's going to end up branching out from that area. So you can keep them kind of small and compact that way. I mean, they're never going to grow like trees, but they can get a little bit wild if you don't give them regular trimmings after they're done flowering. For light, they are going to be, so they are a succulent, so they do prefer a bright indirect light. Most cacti and succulents do. Uh, in order to flower, like I said, after you've given them that dark period, it's really, really important to get them back into a good light. And that will stimulate your flower growth. And then while they're flowering, continuously give them like a medium to bright at the bare minimum. With a little bit of direct sun would be really, really good for them. For water, when they're out of bloom, like I said, pull back on the watering a bit. Again, increase it when you're trying to get them to flower again. And you should have a regularly flowering kalanchoe, which is very fun. They're also very cute because a lot of tropical plants that you get are only going to produce like it's going to have like a sparse flower, where like anthurium will have like maybe a handful of flowers at a time. Bromeliad only has one. But the kalanchoe have like little clusters of flowers in the same way that uh, geraniums do. So you're going to have a much brighter looking plants that way. I'm going to save these three for last. Okay. So speaking of bromeliads, this is bromeliad neoregalia. Neoregalia. Yeah, there's no A in there. They are, again, in the same thing with the anthurium and the mandarin spider plant. They are in the same group, same family as their more common varieties. So they're going to be treated similarly, but they're going to have a lot more interesting color patterns. So the one that I have right now has got, can you see that? Yeah, it's got like an orange blush on the inside of their leaves. And then this variegated stripe to them. A normal bromeliad has just like plain green leaves, and the flower is the spectacle. With bromeliad neoregalia, you're going to get a whole host of different like patterns and colors. There's some out there that are completely red. There's some out there, I think it's called bromeliad neoregalia guacamole, which has got like the craziest pattern to it. It's like green with some white on it, and then like really harsh, dark green, horizontal stripes on the leaves. So you can get some really, really interesting patterns to them. Same thing with the chlorophytum or the spider plant. It is considered to be safe for cats and dogs by the ASPCA, although I will note that they do have, most bromeliad do have like a serrated edge to their leaf, so it's not as safe. It could probably hurt a little bit, although I don't think it's sharp enough to like tear the skin, but it's going to be uncomfortable. The thing about bromeliads is they are a one and done plant for their flower. And what I mean by that is that they are a very long lasting plant, so very slow growing. So it's going to stay this size for a long time. They'll push out a new leaf every now and then. You can kind of see on this one. They grow their leaves out of the center there. And then the flower is going to come out of that central point too. But they only grow one flower their entire life. So they're a very long-lasting plant. It's not like they're going to die in a couple of months. But what you'll have is you'll have your bromeliad, you'll have it grow. Once it's mature and it's decided that it's time to flower, it will produce its flower, which is going to come out it's going to come out straight out the center. They're in an assortment of colors too. Bromeliad have like pink, red, yellow flowers. I believe this one is red. And they're going to have that flower for a long time. And what you'll notice is that you'll get, and this is where actually you would call them pups, is they'll get little offshoots or pups at the bottom. If you'll notice, this is just one plant. That's how most bromeliads are. They're one plant, one flower, what you call a mother plant. And then at the end of their life, they'll produce anywhere from like 2 to 5 pups at the bottom of their stem. And then once those pups are old enough to survive on their own, which means they're, about 3 to 5 inches long, they've got their own root system, the mother plant will die off, which is a little bit deterring to some people until you say, well, now you've got 5 little babies that you can propagate. So it's really like, it's a fun thing to do that you can't do with most plants. Most plants that we have, tropical plants, are propagatable, which just means you can take a section of the stem and create a new one. But there's very few plants out there available on the market that are like you get to see the whole life cycle and start it over again yourself, which is very, very fun. Um, they like uh, they like a very chunky mixture, so similar to the anthurium. You're gonna want to have some bark, some perlite in there. The babies would take that too. They can all take the same soil. They can survive with a regular houseplant soil, but it's really best to get something chunky in there. In their natural environment, they are, I believe, entirely epiphytes, which means that unlike some of these that have epiphytic roots that grab onto trees, entirely epiphytic plants actually don't grow in the soil at all. They grow on trees and on rocks, which means that they really, really want to have a lot of air around those roots. In terms of moisture, they do like to be kept watered frequently. Just like all the other stuff I've shown you so far, make sure that it dries a little bit before you water it again. Don't flood it. But they are a little bit more tolerant of more moisture. One thing that's going to make them really, really happy is, again, because they're epiphytes and in their natural environment, they don't sit in soil. They have evolved to have what's sometimes called a cup, where, here, let me see. You can see in between the leaves, it's got like a little basin or cup on the lower part of the stem, so maybe about halfway up the plants. You actually want to make sure that those cups in between the leaves have some amount of moisture in them. So I've seen people say like a fourth of an inch. It's kind of hard to measure that in my opinion, depending on like what size plant you have. So I would say maybe like a fourth of the length of the cup beneath the leaf. Make sure that that's always filled with moisture. You never want to put moisture directly into the center right there. Always make sure that it's on the lower leaves. But they would really appreciate that. It keeps them moist. It keeps them happy. They're one of the only plants that actually enjoys to have moisture on their leaves, which is fun. Um, they like to have a bright indirect light. I don't think I said that yet. Again, not going to be completely happy with direct light, but they're a little bit tougher, so they can take some direct sun if you have it. And then again, I think I did already say, but they're not going to get very big. They're going to stay about this size, grow a couple new leaves. They're very slow growing, and they're not like ficus or dracaena that are trees, right? They're not going to get really tall. They're just going to stay like little guys, which is nice. If you are looking for a question that I get a lot is, I want a plant that's going to stay in the pot that I have it. These guys, you really don't need to repot them because you get to witness their whole life cycle and they're slow growing. You get yourself like a 4 to 6 inch pot and you're good to go for their entire life cycle. So they're very low maintenance in that respect. Very cool looking plants. And something that I would recommend for someone who's looking for color, but maybe is not looking for flower color. They're a good option for that. Okay. What time is it? Okay. I will do these really, really quick. So we'll get into probably one of the most famous plant categories for tropical indoor houseplants, philodendron. A lot of people really like these, and I can understand why. Things like spider plants, snake plants that have like a handful of different colorations, you can get, I mean, there's hundreds of different types of philodendron. It's crazy. I mean, people dedicate their lives to like finding new philodendron colorations. So I have some that we have right now that are really, really interesting. We typically have like the generic like cordatum, so that's the heartleaf vine. We try and keep all of the basic ones that you think of when you think of philodendron. So like monstera, which is a philodendron. We keep like the Brazil philodendron, the lemon lime, all that jazz. But every now and then we'll get something really, really cool, and that's what I have here. So I'll start with, I think this one. This one's the most different. This is Ring of Fire. It's got a serrated leaf. So that basically just means that, I mean, like a serrated knife, it's got little bumps on the edge. You can kind of see here, this is a young one. So we've got this leaf down here that's got basically no bumps in the leaf. It's kind of just wavy. That's typically how the younger leaves on the Ring of Fire look. But as it ages, I mean, you'll get some really, really wavy looking leaves there, which is very fun. They've got the base of their leaf is like a dark green, and then you'll get patches of like golds, uh, palish green here. You'll get some yellow. And even on the newer leaves, there's no fresh leaf on this one. We got one that's just coming out. But on the newer leaves, some of the variegation can even look like red, which is very pretty. That's where they get their name from, obviously, Ring of Fire. Um, they are, well, I'll talk about that when I'm done with the philodendron. Then we have this one's called Painted Lady. So it's got, you can see right away that it's got a very, very bright red stem. Very pretty. It's one of the ones that has that. So like the Ring of Fire doesn't really have, most of its stems are green or like a light pinky color. Painted Lady is going to have a very, very bright red stem. Same thing with the Ring of Fire. All of the newer stems are going to be more saturated in color. So if you can kind of see there, you've got like a more of like an orange color, and then the newer leaves are more red. But what's really exciting about them is that their leaf pattern, hold on, show up, come on, is like speckled. So when you get like variegated Monstera or variegated Pink Princess or the Ring of Fire, you've got like patches of coloration. Painted Lady and the next one I want to talk about have like speckly leaves, which is very, very cool. Especially when you get the larger leaves when they start maturing. I mean, it looks like a mosaic kind of. And then the last one, this is Orange Marmalade. So it's got the same speckling to it, but their leaves are going to be more orange. It's just a little bit different. That's where they get their name from. All philodendron, they're all aroids. So they're all going to be plants that like a chunky mixture. Same thing with the bromeliad. Same thing with the anthurium. They're a little bit more forgiving on their soil. So I've known people who grow them just fine in like regular houseplant soil. But if you really want to take the next step to give them like what they really, really want, what's going to help them thrive, do really well, then you want to do something that's got like bark and perlite in it. They are a vine. So philodendron actually means like, I think it's like lover of trees or like tree lover. And it's because in their natural environment, they climb. They climb like crazy on trees. Like they just go up. They'll start in the soil and then they'll use their really thick aerial roots to grab onto trees and just start going. So eventually all philodendron are going to need something to climb on, but it's super easy. Get yourself a singular stake or I know a lot of people actually just pin them into their walls. Uh, and some people do, some people don't. But you can just get like I know exists a product that you can like pin into the wall, and then it's like a little hook that you can help the plant travel along the wall with. But they are going to need something to climb on. And all philodendron are going to be like a bright indirect light. Just especially the ones that are variegated, they need that to kind of stimulate them to produce more variegation. If you have them in low light, they're going to start producing leaves that are darker in color, more faded. If you want them to produce that variegation, bright indirect light is what you want. They can handle a little bit of direct sun too. I actually had one outside last year that was in more sun than it should have taken. And it adapted to it, but it looked rough for a while. So you're going to want to stay in like bright indirect light for them. And they're going to appreciate a higher humidity too. So bathroom, kitchen, or clumps together with other plants or on a pebble tray. So that is all of the plants that I had to show. We can take questions. If Sally wants to get through those, that would be
Yeah, we've got a few questions to start. Everybody, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them about these plants. If you have questions not about these plants, we'll get to them if we have time. And we'll get through as many as we can. So I will start. Your first question is a recommendation, and they may have seen something that they're interested in, but this person is looking for a colorful leaf plant for bright indirect light besides Chinese evergreen or snake plant. So I know some of these philodendron, I think I would probably qualify, but what is like the most vibrant foliage plant that you would recommend?
sorry, was the specification that it's low light?
No, bright indirect. So you get
Bright and
some,
direct. Okay. So
yeah.
trying to think of what we have right now. So a lot of the philodendron would fit into that category, like you said.
I thought of the pink princess before I saw that orange marmalade, which is, and
Yes.
the lady. Whew. How does it
Pink
really
princess
pretty?
is very well known, and I understand why, but I think there's a lot of philodendron that are way more magnificent looking. So I would look into that category. If you're not interested in a philodendron, the Apobolus has got the silvery leaf, so it's got the purple on it. Um, a lot of Dracaena can are considered low light plants by most people, but they can handle a bright indirect light. So if that's what you have, a lot of Dracaena out there, there's white aspen, which is one of my favorite. It's got like really bright white stripes down the leaf. There's Dracaena Marley, which has got like a golden stripe down the center of the leaf. There's a couple of red varieties like Marginata. I'm trying to think what we have right now. It depends on what size you want to, because there's a lot of smaller plants like African violets you can get some color out of that could take a bright indirect light.
We have a class on those on Tuesday for anybody who wants to grow African violets.
Yeah, my
Classic,
coworker Louis,
classic
it's
plant.
Louis, right?
Yeah, Louis did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Louis used to have a collection, so he
Yes,
teaches.
I know. He's shown me pictures of them. It's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of begonias that I know some people are not a fan of begonias. I'm not a fan of like the traditional begonias, but there are some begonia species out there that are super, super cool. One that I can think of is Begonia ferox, which is Ferox, that has got like a spiky textured leaf to it. It's really hard to describe without seeing it in person, but it's almost like dragon spikes along it, and it's got like a deep purple leaf, which is really cool. Um, yeah, if you're looking for something easy, bright indirect light, I would say stick to like a philodendron, Dracaena. I can understand wanting to not get another Chinese evergreen, because those are recommended a lot because of how durable they are, but you can only do so much with them. You can also get away with doing some ficus in bright indirect light. It depends on which one. If you have a variegated one, they're going to want more direct light, so that's going to stay away from that. Um, but some ficus, some of like the darker green, more yellowish, limey leaves can survive in a bright indirect light as well.
Okay,
If you're looking
cool.
for a tree.
All right, our next question is about, okay, the potting soil mixes where you talk about mixing in perlite or orchid bark. Can you talk a little bit about how much perlite or bark you would add in for these types of plants?
So you can get online resources that will tell you like a very specific, like 17% perlite, 35% bark. What I typically do is I will get myself a base. Consider in your head how big of a pot you're going to be planting in, right? So get yourself enough soil to fill that pot about 60 to 75% of the way. Um, and then you're going to want to do for the rest of your pot, fill it up equally with bark and perlite. It's for me personally, it's a very loose mixture. When you do too much bark, you're going to have a problem with drying out super fast. A lot of people have that problem with orchids that grow in bark, where they do bark because it's really good for epiphytic plants, but then when you have something that's just in bark, you're gonna have to water it every couple of days as opposed to something that's got like soil or sphagnum moss in there that can hold on to moisture for a little bit longer. So that's the really only thing that you're concerned about is if you add too much bark and perlite so that your soil is too well draining, you're gonna end up having to water every couple of days. If you do not enough, then you're gonna have the same problem where your soil is too dense. So I usually play around with it. It's typically going to be around 60 to 70% soil, 30 or 40 to 30% your other mixture or whatever you're adding in, whether that be just bark, just perlite. A lot of people have their own personal preference. I like to do a whole mix of everything just because I feel like if I'm doing all of them, I'm covering all my bases. Um, but that's what I would start out with, about 60 to 70% soil, the rest of it being your additive, bark, perlite.
Awesome. Okay. We've got a few more questions. Okay, here's one about the Kalanchoe. This person's Kalanchoe, she has one, but it's gotten very leggy. She wants to know if you can prune it to make it's blooming now. She wants to know if you can prune it to make it more full.
Yes. It Whether or not it's going to continue to produce flowers after you prune it just depends on how long it's been flowering. If it's just started its flowering, you can actually get away with pruning it now if you really wanted to. And then it'll take a little bit of time, but it'll end up producing more flowers in that cycle. If it's kind of towards the middle or end of its flowering cycle, then you're probably going to end up having to skip that flowering season. But yes, you can always prune them while they're flowering. It's just that you're going to end up cutting off your flowers. But yes, you can.
Gotcha. And so you prune it. That's what she's asking also how to, so I know you showed that before. Can you show again the area, the way that you
Yeah,
trim?
I don't think we have any pairs of scissors, so I can just kind of point.
Yeah, you can just kind of show where you'd make the cuts. That'd probably
Yeah,
be
I
good.
wasn't gonna actually cut, but it's a good way of showing if I point with the scissors as opposed to my fingers. Um, so I mean, it's a little bit hard with these ones because they're all decently sized, but
Yeah.
say for whatever reason I wanted to trim it down to like these leaves. I just like the shape, you know. I would want to take my scissors and cut right in between.
Yep. Right at the base where those leaves start.
Yeah, right
Okay.
here. So what
Okay.
you want to do is you want to cut in between your nodes. You want to cut a little bit closer to your old node as opposed to the one that you're cutting off. If you cut off all the way up here, you're going to have a little bit of stem that just kind of sits there. So you want to cut about maybe like a few centimeters above the node that you're going to have remaining after you cut off the.
Okay. And then will it branch from that point?
Yes. So
Okay.
Kalanchoe and most branching plants um, are going to end up branching from the knuckle or the node. Um, they don't typically produce new branches uh, just anywhere. It's going to be where those nodes are or where the leaves are growing out of.
Okay. So you
So
want
if
to,
if
okay.
you cut off just this top here, it's not going to grow any new stems right here because there's no node, there's nowhere for it to push out new stem material. So it's always going to be, you're going to get your branching at the node below where you've made your cuts.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. The last question that I have, and I know you showed the kalanchoe, which have blooms. Can you talk a little about any house plants you would recommend right now that have flowers of note for people who really want their flowers?
Yeah, so we always have African violets. Um, we always have orchids. I know that orchids have a bad reputation, but I'm telling you, as long as you work with them, they can be really, really rewarding. So I would try it if you're not super adverse to it yet. There are a lot of different species of orchids out there as well. I know a lot of people are more familiar with the Phalaenopsis, which is the one that you'll see in like grocery stores or Home Depot that's got like the really tall flowers, or the tall spikes with the flowers and the really long leaves. But there are some, I mean, there's oncidiums, there's paphs, there's all that jazz. We won't get that until spring. But I would look into orchids if you're looking for a flowering plant, because there's probably something there for you. If you don't like the Phalaenopsis, there's other orchids. Other things that flower, the Tradescantia, which is also sometimes called Wandering Jew, has a little pink flower when it gets a good amount of light. Um, what else? Um, so almost all the plants that we have flower. It's just that which ones are interesting. Um,
Flowers of note versus the little
yeah,
flowers.
yeah.
We should probably do a whole class on that at some point.
Yeah, we should. There's the spring cactus, which we'll be getting soon. It's in the same family as the Christmas cactus, so they're going to grow the same way. They just got a similarly or differently shaped leaf to them. Um, they have, in my opinion, the most attractive flower of the three holiday cactus, so the Christmas, Thanksgiving, and spring cactus. So I would look out for that. Spring cactus are coming soon. They've got a really cute little flower, and they come in a good amount of colors too. Um, hmm. Then there's always going to be, if you want something fragrance, and these are highlight, the ones I'm about to mention. So if you don't have a highlight spot, you're probably not going to get them to flower. But if you do, gardenia, jasmine, stephanotis, they're all going to have a white flower and produce varying degrees of aroma, um, which is really nice, especially in the spring and summer, where you can put them like on a deck. Um, I think that's all that we have that I would recommend for flowering. Um, when it comes to flowers in the house, unfortunately, oh, anthurium. Duh. I forgot about that because I already talked about them. But anthurium is one of the flowering plants that you can kind of get away with doing in a little bit lower light, which is what I was about to say. So, the unfortunate thing about flowers is they typically come when you have lots of light. Um, a lot of them require to have some amounts of direct sun. Um, so you run into that issue where if you have like a low light area, you're going to have a hard time growing flowering plants in there. Things that can survive in lower lights and will possibly produce flowers like a low to medium light. Peace lilies, it's just a white flower, but it is a flower. Anthuriums, you might get a couple of flowers, and they come in like brighter colors. They come in like red, yellow, pink, orange. Um, and sometimes you can get African violets to flower in medium to bright light. So, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Great. Okay, we have one last question since we have a few minutes, and it's a little bit open-ended, so we may not be able to address the whole thing, but the question was, could you address ferns at all if there's time? So I'm not sure if that would be like recommendations or basic care.
You
Maybe
said
you could
ferns, like burning
ferns.
ferns.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite ferns for
Ferns,
houseplants?
yes, I do. I could not include them in this because there's so many of them. Um, and Louis, the one who's doing our African Violets webinar, loves ferns. If you ever want to talk about ferns, talk to Louis. I promise you, he will talk to you for a very long time.
Yes. Every plant is Louis' favorite plant.
Yes. Um, but there's a couple that are my favorites.
Okay.
I am very attracted to like big leaves, like wider leaves.
Okay.
And you can get that from the crocodile fern. It's got an amazing, I mean, it's gorgeous. It grows, if you're familiar with bird's nest ferns, it kind of grows similarly to that. Um, but where the bird's nest fern is just like a plain green leaf, the crocodile fern has got like dark green veining. So it almost looks like scales. Super cool. And we do have some right now. They're one of the more durable ferns too. Um, Another one that's really cool is the Austral gem fern. That's Austral, like the beginning of Australia, and then gem, like a gemstone. It's got a similar look to if you're familiar with the maidenhair ferns. So they've got like that dainty kind of clover looking leaf, I guess. Yeah, it's like a dainty look to it, but they're a lot more durable. So if you ever touch one, an austral gem fern, you'll feel that it's a lot thicker. It's more rubbery. And so they can withstand a little bit more drought than if you've ever tried to do a maidenhair fern, you know that they are very, very, very finicky. Austral gem, you can get the same look, but none of that finickiness, which is very, very fun. So I think I would say that that's my favorite fern, the austral gem fern. Um, Ferns in general are something that you can get something that's super easy. So you get like Boston ferns. I mean, a lot of people put them outside on their patios in the spring and summer. Um, you can get ones like bird's nest ferns that are more durable. You can get staghorn ferns that you can mount on pieces of wood, which is really, really cool. Elkhorn ferns are in the same category. And then you can have things if you're looking for a little bit more of a challenge. So you can have the maidenhair ferns that like a lot of humidity. Um, what else is a little bit hard? Oh, the heartleaf fern. That's probably one of the hardest ferns out there. They've got it's not exactly what it sounds like, a little heartleaf. Uh, but it's a fern. And they are very, very finicky. But I mean, that's up to how much you're willing to take on, right? So if you're someone who wants something super easy, I would stay with like the more durable ferns. So Boston fern, button fern, lemon button fern, which are actually not even related at all, besides being ferns, which is kind of funny. They have almost the exact same name. Um, Austral gem, crocodile, bird's nest, all of those easier ferns. And then you have the harder ones like maidenhair, heartleaf, all that. Ferns in general are going to be like a higher humidity. Moisture level, water them when the top like fourth to a third of soil is dry to the touch. You never want to let a fern get completely dry, ever. Because then you're gonna have a lot of problems. And then most ferns, there are some ferns that can tolerate bright light. Like I know or sorry, not bright light, direct sun. I know that the bird's nest fern can tolerate a little bit of it, but in general, ferns are considered to be like a medium to bright indirect light. They burn just too easily. A lot of ferns are really delicate. If you've ever felt them before, you'll know that they're kind of like tissue paper, which means that they cannot withstand direct sunlight. So they're going to be like a medium to bright light. We've got lots of them right now. Again, if you wanted to come in and get some recommendations, talk to Louis in the greenhouse. He will give you some.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. You're getting some nice notes. I'll give you your feedback once we finish up because you've gotten some really nice feedback. Um, so just a couple of notes from me, and then I'll let you wrap up. Everybody, obviously, you're here, so you've seen that our classes are starting to roll out. We're adding more pretty much daily at this point, but weekly, really check back in. Our in-person classes are resuming in February. We are going to have a full event dedicated to orchids. For those who are interested, African Violets is next week. Orchids is going to be February 22nd at the Gainesville store. So we've got plenty going on with houseplants, and then hopefully we'll have Savannah back by webinar at some point as well. So keep up with our website or join our email list so you can get those announcements. And Savannah, do you have anything you'd like to conclude with?
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, as was mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I do all of the ordering for the greenhouse. If you ever have anything that you are interested in or you would like to see something new, you can always call and ask. If it's available, we can get it. So even if we don't have it, and we have a good array of stuff in our greenhouse, even now for being in winter. But always reach out because I'm always looking for interesting things. I need visual stimulation in the greenhouse, so I'm always trying to change it up. So if you have something new that you're looking for, let us know and we'll look into it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Savannah. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Please look out for your follow-up email tomorrow and with your coupon so you can go shop at the greenhouse and your recording so you can watch this again if you need to double back and check anything. Savannah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I will see you later. And everybody, we look forward to seeing you at the store sometime soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.